Andy Burnham last night spoke with LBC. It's his first interview since becoming the Member of Parliament for Makerfield. And he signalled he might introduce what's known as an Amazon tax, and he's pointing at a reform of business rates in order to try and save Britain's high streets. Let's have a listen.
I believe there is a case for higher business rates on warehouses and the major developments we see on the outskirts of our cities, so that we can cut business rates for pubs, and I've proposed a 20% cut, and lift some high street businesses out of business rates altogether. I say some and not all, because I think it's important to prioritise and reward the businesses that bring social benefit, the businesses that bring people together, the bars, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the hairdressers, because the high street really needs to get more of our attention. We need to bring life back to the high street.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose a question that many small businesses will be asking, is this what they're looking for? Because many small businesses have said that the rise in national insurance contributions have been incredibly crippling for them. I mean, obviously, I just see what's in my own algorithmic feed, as we all do, but the number, I just see it where I live as well, in Brixton, the number of small businesses that are closing down at an astonishing rate is very, very, very troubling. Now, the former Manchester mayor says that he plans to stick to Labour's 2024 election manifesto promises of not raising the big three: income tax, VAT, or personal national insurance contributions. Well, let's now catch up with two experts. We're going to be speaking with Dan Neidle, who's the founder of Tax Policy Associates. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
And Helen Dickinson from the who's the CEO of the British Retail Consortium. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Ayesha.
So look, Dan, I'm going to start with you. When Andy Burnham says there's movement, what kind of things is he talking about?
I'm not sure. He's got quite a difficult problem, which is that the UK will raise next year about 1.2 trillion in tax. You'd think you could find a bit here and there in 1.2 trillion, but by the time you've ruled out all the things which Labour and Mr Burnham have ruled out, you're left with maybe 60 billion of taxes that you can play with and adjust and scrabble around and try and get that 4.7 billion he needs. So it's not an easy task.
And so he's talking, he's relied upon this thing, this kind of warehouse tax, this Amazon tax, and he's tapping into something which a lot of people feel to be very true. And Helen will come in on this in a moment. The sort of death of the high street, everything's done by these big warehouses now. But is there much money in that, Dan?
There's a catch. The catch is, let's say you abolish rates altogether on small shops and pubs, and that will save small shops and pubs lots of money in the next couple of years. But then when they come to renegotiate their lease, they'll find almost certainly that their rent will go up, because in the long run, all the research shows that most of the economic cost of business rates isn't actually borne by retailers, it's borne by landlords. So changing business rates and trying to help small businesses is a short-term help for them. In the long term, it's a tax cut for landlords, and that seems like a mistake.
That's interesting. Although, Helen, what do you think about this? Because of course, businesses are really struggling, and business rates is something that comes up. Would this be welcome relief for small businesses?
I think Andy Burnham is absolutely right to really put the focus on communities, on local investment, because that is what drives local growth and local jobs, and particularly in retail, so many entry-level opportunities for people who get their first foray into the world of work. But I think every single incoming government for the last 10 years has committed to supporting the high street. And, as Dan outlined, it's a really thorny problem. Every government in advance in their manifestos say they're going to scrap business rates or do something that would support the high street. And here we are, and we're still having, the same commitment. So I think, what is most important is that the burden of taxation on retail businesses, on hospitality businesses, on those businesses that do drive, local economic growth, vibrancy in high streets and wider communities right across the country, that burden comes down. Because what we've seen on the back of both rises of business rates and of national insurance, retail's tax burden has gone up 20% in the last couple of years, and retail and hospitality both pay a higher proportion of their profits in tax, and that is holding back that investment. And if that's where I think his focus should be, rather than trying to sort of single out different bits of the high street, because I think that's a recipe for unintended consequences.
And Dan, do you think there's any world in which an incoming Andy Burnham could reverse those increases in national insurance, or would it just be too expensive right now?
It's a lot of money. It was a significant tax increase, I think 12 billion overall. Partially reversing it, if he has money to spare, would be a sensible thing to do. But I think at the moment, it's not that he has money to spare. He's trying to find another 4.7 billion. So unfortunately, it doesn't look very realistic. But I do wish that politicians and people who advise and speak for the retail sector could focus on changes that will make a difference in the long term, and not business rates, because cutting business rates in the long term is not a cut for the high street, it's a cut for landlords.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people wouldn't have realised that. And look, Helen, what are the things that you would like to see, like within the sphere of what's realistic, given, as Dan says, there is this huge pressure on the incoming Prime Minister to find this extra money for defence, so there isn't a huge amount of money swishing around right now. But what are some of the practical things you would urge Andy Burnham to do to really help small and medium-sized businesses who are struggling right now?
I think really focusing on the youth unemployment problem. So there are nearly 1 million people not in education or employment or training. So I think what the increases in national insurance have done, and above inflationary rises in the national living wage over the last couple of years, has really undermined businesses' potential to invest in people who don't have that experience yet. So I think that would be certainly something that I would put top of his priority list.
And just to jump in there, Helen, I mean, the government has just announced a scheme, I suppose, to try and get to some of that, where I think employers will get £3,000 if they employ somebody between 18 and 24 years old who have been, I think, long-term unemployed. Is that right? Does that help?
That, I think, is helpful. I think part of the problem that retailers are highlighting to me is, they don't at the moment understand how to sort of access that scheme. It is one of many. And I think if we really, really want to make a difference at scale, we have to simplify some of these opportunities, make them much easier for businesses, both large and small, to be able to tap into. And to drive them at scale, given the significance of the problem that we are seeing, and that Alan Milburn is highlighting will only get worse unless something is done pretty quickly. And
look, Dan, it's a difficult fiscal climate for Andy Burnham if when he becomes Prime Minister. What would you be advising him to do if you were his sort of chief economics advisor on tax, Dan?
I should do a quick plug. Taxpolicy.org.uk, we've posted a list of 35 tax increases that he could consider, ranging from the plausible to the implausible. I think top of the list would be to reform capital gains tax. You could make it a better tax, you could make it drive economic growth and raise money, and maybe afford to cut income tax a bit as well. So that would be the top of my list.
And just explain how that would work.
So right now, the rate of capital gains tax on shares is 24%. That's a lot less than the rate of income tax. But your capital gain can include gains that aren't real, but are just inflation. Imagine you invested £100,000 10 years ago. Today, just inflation has eroded the value of your return significantly, but you're taxed on that. So people who make long-term investments end up paying too much capital gains tax. On the other hand, people who can magically turn their income into a capital gain end up taxed at the low rate of 24%. So you can fix both, reform capital gains tax sensibly, prioritise long-term investment, and raise money.
So that would be first on your list. What about anything with corporation tax? Like, I mean, I know it sounds counterintuitive because there isn't a lot of money, but is there any world in which Andy Burnham might give some more tax breaks or cut corporation tax in any way to stimulate growth, or is it just unaffordable?
Gosh, I'm not an economist, but my sense is that tax cuts are not looking particularly plausible at the moment. The risk of trying to prioritise particular types of sectors or types of business, and there's hints in what he's saying that he wants to do that, is that you create a lot of complication, a lot of uncertainty, and lots of tax avoidance. Everyone should pay tax in the same way. That's fair and that's workable. Once you start saying substances are good and deserve a better treatment, some are bad and deserve a worse treatment, you end up down a bad road, which ends in inefficiency and tax avoidance.
And look, Helen, we all feel the struggle that the high street is going through. I mean, I just gave you my own local examples. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see so many small businesses, restaurants closing their doors. Many restaurants been there for decades. It's very, very sad to see what's happening. But also, we as consumers and citizens, we aren't using the high street as much as we should. We all bemoan the death of the high street, but we then all, our consumer habits are not massively supportive. What do you think can be done, not just from a government point of view, but for us as consumers as well? Because we're not exactly there for the high street when it needs us.
I mean, I think, we all make our individual choices about, convenience and value. And I think, certainly what we've seen over the course of the last decade or more is most retail businesses now sell online, in stores, and a big conversation in retail is how to ensure that physical retail, so high streets and just local shops are a place that people want to visit, not just to undertake a transaction but to experience the joy of looking around and meeting friends, as well as doing some shopping. But I think what we have seen is that the cost from a retail perspective of being able to offer that, particularly as investment in physical space, whether that is rent or particularly rates. And I slightly agree with what Dan said earlier, just because we don't have a sort of a perfectly functioning property market, and that's why we have so many vacant properties. But we've really got to bring those costs down, as well as the industry ensuring that it is making the offer something that people really value and want to come and experience, and it's just based on the physical transaction of buying something, because sometimes we all need the convenience of being able to shop online or in stores. And as customers, we don't really think of them as two separate things. We want it all to be joined up. And
I know. Absolutely. And the thing about community and, going to the shops, I think, is a very important part of society. It's very important. It's a very important part of community, but that also bleeds into other things like crime and antisocial behaviour. And is your high street a nice place to go? Or if you shoplifting, if you go to your shop and you're seeing people getting robbed and things like that, all of that stuff, I think, is a really big part of the story. Now, just final question to you, Dan, because one of our listeners, Martin, has messaged in and he disagrees with you. He says Dan is wrong when he says a business rate cut for small shops is in fact an eventual cut for the landlord. I've been a landlord for decades, and that's certainly not the case. The market rent is governed under the 1954 Act, and the competition to rent property is governed by the rent levels in the town, not the business rate. And he says, as a landlord, I would see a business rate cut as a boon that enables the tenants to continue trading rather than selling up because they couldn't make a profit. What do you say to Martin, Dan?
Yeah, it surprises lots of people when they hear that actually the economic incidence, as we say, the cost is on landlords. But the evidence is really clear. The IFS says it, the Treasury says it, the OECD says it. There's been a pile of academic research looking what happens when business rate and similar taxes change. And the answer is the market rents change. It's a really unfortunate result, and the universe would be better if that wasn't how it was, because we could then play with rates and we'd benefit small businesses. But in the real world, we can't. The benefit goes to landlords. You can have short-term business rates holidays, and that's what governments have done. They know this is an issue, so they make short-term changes which won't flow through to the landlords. But a long-term change, cut or abolition, waste of time, waste of money.
Gosh, well, Martin from Bristol, Dan has come back to you directly. Well, look, Dan and Helen, thank you so much for your time. It's a really, really interesting conversation.